Hey guys, it's Max, and we're back with Battlecode 2015. This time, we're going to look at some units in the game. The unit data is included in robottype.html in the documentation folder. I extracted the data using Mathematica to get this table, where I have all of the robot types and all of their different characteristics. What I want to know is which unit should I build? Which unit is the best? So that's something like a figure of merit. I also want to know how much do the units really cost? Because after all, there's a cost of building the unit in ore, and that's given by ore cost here, but they also require a building that spawns them. So I need to compute the effective cost of that building that's required to spawn them. Here are the building ore costs for the different buildings. But that's not enough. We need to know how many launchers, for example, the Aerospace Lab will produce. If it only manages to produce one launcher in the entire game, then I have to add 500 to the cost of the launcher to get the effective true cost of the launcher. However, if the Aerospace Lab manages to produce 10 launchers in the entire game, then I can just add 50 ore to the cost of each launcher to get its effective cost. To estimate the number of units that each building will be able to produce, I use the spawn time. So I take 1,000 rounds and I divide that by the spawn time, and that's an estimate of the number of units it will be able to produce in the game. The game has a maximum round limit of 2,000, but in many cases we can expect the building to only be producing for less time than that. For example, the building may not have been constructed until the round is partly over, or perhaps the round ends early because one team wins over the other. Or maybe you run out of ore and that building can no longer continue producing. For example, maybe you built 2 buildings so that you could get those units out sooner, and then those two buildings were idle subsequent to reaching that number of units. So the amortized building cost is the total cost divided by the expected number of units that you can produce. For the Aerospace Lab, that number is actually 50 because it's expected to produce about 10 launchers in 1,000 rounds. For the other units, the amortized cost is less. What really matters is when we add this amortized cost back into the base cost of the unit, which is shown here. So the base cost is in blue and the amortized building cost is in orange. We can see that the amortized building cost is actually a small fraction of the base unit cost. So in future calculations, we're just going to assume that the base unit cost is the true unit cost. Note that this simulation has a few errors in it, a few limitations. One of them is that it doesn't consider the fact that you can't build an Aerospace Lab straight away. Let's look at the tech tree to see why. So the tech tree shows that you need a helipad in order to build an Aerospace Lab. Similarly, the tank factory requires a barracks, and the training field requires a technology institute. Realistically, that technology institute is not going to be producing computers while your training field is producing a commander. You may have just built the technology institute to get to the training field. So really, assuming that the buildings cost about the same amount, for these 3 units, the commander, the tank, and the launcher, that will roughly double, roughly speaking, that will roughly double the amortized building cost for those guys. However, you can see here, even if we doubled that, that would only be 50 out of 250. And doubled that, well, now this one matters. We'll get to that in a second. Well, let's do that one now. So, yeah, doubling this, that would have a pretty significant impact. It would go from 450 up to 500. Something like that. But the commander is the one that really makes a difference, because you might expect only to build one commander. That's because you're only allowed to have one commander at a time. The second commander you build costs twice as much, and the third costs 4 times as much, and so on. So it's pretty important to keep that commander alive. So the true unit cost of a commander, your first commander, is not 100. It's 100 plus the cost of those 2 buildings. And those 2 buildings are the training field, and I believe it was the Technology Institute. So if that would be 200 and 200, that's 400. and then you've got your 100 for the commander. So this should be out at about 500, the true unit cost for the commander. We'll have to keep that in mind in the later calculations. For most of these, we'll assume the base unit cost, and for the commander, we'll try to put in the number 500. That's a note that I wrote here. Now, if I want to pick the best unit, maybe I want the one with the highest damage per round. Note that this is plotted for a robot that is fully supplied, because a robot that does not have any supplies will attack half as fast. And of course, then it will do half the damage per round. We can see that the missile does a lot of damage per round. That's another one of these hard ones I don't really know how to incorporate, because the missile self-destructs to do damage, and when it self-destructs it does 20 damage. So in a sense it does 20 damage per round, but that's not really accurate, because it takes the launcher 6 turns to build a missile. So in a sense, if it does 20 damage exactly every 6 turns, then that would be something on the order of about 3 damage per round, and it would be sort of middling. Not the best, but not the worst. However, it can hit multiple targets, like the Basher, and at the same time it can hit friendly targets. So the Basher, which deals area damage around itself, and the missile, which basically does the same thing but destructs itself in the process, are a little bit hard to incorporate in this chart. However, among the others, we can see that the commander is a good choice in damage per round. I thought about this for a while and then decided that damage per round is not necessarily the most important factor, because there's a type of unit that's often referred to as a glass cannon. It has a high damage per round, but it's so weak that it's easily destroyed by the enemy. And you don't want units like that, because they'll be destroyed. So I've plotted, in this case, damage per round times hit points. I think I got the plot label wrong. Here we go. Damage per round times hit points. And we can see that the tower and the headquarters are way better than everything else. So let's just delete them from the list. We're trying to decide which things we can build that are really good, and you can't build any more towers and headquarters. You just start with them. So let's look at the ones that are remaining. Now we see damage per round times hit point is here, and the commander and the tank are really good. But again, that's not a complete picture, because we don't just get these units for free. Like, yeah, sure, the commander and the tank are really good, but it's not free. They cost a lot more than the other units. So what we need to do is finally divide by the ore cost. So let's do that. Damage per round times hit point per ore cost. Now we get this plot. And the commander looks artificially good because he only got divided by about 100, but he should have been divided by 500, which is what we said before. So let's take this number 12, divide by 5, and it gets us about 2, somewhere around 2. So imagine that the commander number is something about 2, and then you've got a more accurate picture here. The tank is then the number 1 guy, sitting here at about double that. These guys are less than 2, and these guys are about 2. So that says that maybe early game you want to go with Bashers. If you can manage to get them to hit multiple targets, then they are the best. If they can hit just 2 targets, they're better than everything else. If you can't get them to hit multiple targets, then the soldiers are going to be the best units early on, and then later you can go for tanks. I only say that because it seems to me that it could take you a little while to get up to the tank technology. It's not clear which one's the best. And then of course these other units, they're really just not combat units. You should use them for their other purposes. More on that later. So we've gone over a bunch of different metrics of what unit is the best, a bunch of different figures of merit, and I am not claiming one of them is the best. We can even take out one of them, like say we do damage per round per ore cost. We'll take out hit points, say it's not included, because after all, if you don't expect your units to take damage, then it doesn't matter how many hit points they have. This is relevant if you're, for example, kiting the enemy. If you're dealing damage to him, but he can't deal damage to you. Is that even possible in this year's game? That's something we'll address later on. Here's a summary of the figures of merit. And now notice that the commander is artificially good in all 4 categories. In damage per round per ore, damage per round times hit points per ore, damage per round times hit point, and damage per round. It's the best in everything in part because in the per ore category, we're only considering the cost of the commander and not its tech building. If we consider its tech building, then we can divide these numbers roughly by 5. And so then those are down around 0.2, which then makes the best damage per round per ore unit the soldier, and the damage per round times hit point per ore unit to be the tank. Another good thing about a unit that's very strong is that it doesn't have to spend as much time walking to the target. That is to say that if you have 2 soldiers instead of 1 tank, then those 2 soldiers may get in each other's way in the combat, whereas the tank is not going to get in its own way. And similarly, when it's half dead, its attack power is the same, whereas 2 soldiers, when they're half dead, one of them's gone, so the total attack power is halved. So there are a few more things to keep in mind when you're comparing different units, but I think this shows pretty strongly that the tank is very effective if you can make it work. At the same time, the basher is also very effective. If you can make it hit 2 units, then as we said before, it's very good. I've published this picture and other ones on the website under the lectures section, so you can download it and have a look at it for yourself. The notebook will also be available so that if you have Mathematica, you can run it yourself and make changes as necessary. Let's assess the question of kiting in the next episode. See you then.